Hi everyone, this is Dr. Alana, and today is the session for the people who have data when we've moved on from our analysis and now we need to figure out how to put that analysis into a cogent story that leads to our argument, and we call that generally the results section. We're going to do this in a number of ways. People in the room are going to I'm going to ask them for a discussion on what's going on right now and challenges they may be facing, so I can help make sure that I address those challenges in upcoming weeks or office hours. I'm going to look at a number of published works and their results chapters, and we're going to analyze them, and from that develop a checklist of things you need to keep in mind. I have one student's work that came in when I called for data, and it's an excellent example. We're going to backwards map it and give you a few more resources on the topic, a design your own homework, and then a few next steps. So that's the plot of what we're doing today. And I want to say thank you to the 5 people in the room who have done the poll. However, there are 14 in the room, so please, I'm looking for 9 more people to just hit the top of your screen where it says polls and take 30 seconds to just pinpoint the 3 things on that list that are a little challenging to you. We're a data-driven company, and if you don't give us the data, it's easy for us to go astray. So thank you ahead of time for that. And if you're watching by recording, the poll should still be open, I believe, on the website. So we're hoping you can do it as well. Okay, in the chat room. Good to see that people are here and saying hello. As soon as the polling, one of the options, the other checkbox disappeared. You may only be able to check one box then, and if so, it's probably a user error, but give me your top one then if what Adrian says is true and you can't check 3. Because I won't be able to go back now and get it fixed. Okay, discussion in the chat box, please. What are you doing? Are you writing your results sections? Are you still analyzing? Are you writing discussion? What's up with you? What are you actually working on right now? And on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being it's the most miserable thing you've ever done in this work, to 5 being you've got it aced, how is it going? So just a quick sentence, please. What are you doing and how is it going? And I will know from that if I'm guiding the ship the right way for the next 3 weeks after this. Really appreciate you jumping in and telling me, analyzing and writing the results, and kind of some days better than others. Thank you very much, Renee. If you want to tell me if you can, what's making it a little hard, that'll help me as well. Going back to lit review and stuck on the lit review. Okay. If I see more of that. Also another one, writing a lit review. We need a writing lit review and a 3. I work full time, as many of us do, and as the CEO, so you have a lot of things on your plate, having trouble being consistent. Yep, that's why I did it first thing in the morning before. If I really have to write, I pretty much have to do it right when I first get up, and I just hate it this time of year because there's so many more interesting things to do when I first get up, when the sun's out. Thank you for those. Anybody else? Keep going back to lit review. We might take that up. that might be something to consider, is how does Lit back all of this up? How do we do that? Also, the other session, the one that's running parallel to this on Wednesdays, we covered Lit last week. So it's one of the on-demand recordings. And it might have things there that were helpful to you. Analyzing data, hard to find to put it down. Data analysis is intense. Actually, Timothy, that's what we're working on today, is the moving from the analysis to the writing part. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge that I've never been able to make become easier. So we're going to analyze the way a bunch of people did it. No one way. Thank you for those. Anybody else want to jump in? Very useful, especially if, I think for now, for those of you working on Lit, I'm going to send you off to the Big Marker conferences, and let me just get that link for you. And then you can look up the on-demand. So I'll just move to the screen. If you move into PD Education, so it's Big Marker, Communities, Doctoral Net Conferences. This is the link. Oh, that's not the link. Oh, okay. So the poll worked in the other browser. That's interesting. That is not what I want. How funny. Okay, here we go. There's the link. All right, so if you go to that link, I just put it in, you get to this page, which is on your screens. If you scroll down to the on-demands over in the right-hand side, but you can see all about Lit Review. That is a pretty good webinar and has discussions of how you might want to approach it, ways to organize it, etc. So it's done for the population who don't have data yet, but it's equally good for that. And I added the link in the chat box, Renita, right above yours. So you probably were just typing that when I was adding it. It's right above you. And if you ever need to go back, there's on other things, if you go to view more, that pops open more, and you can keep clicking that downward arrow and see all the 500 webinars that you might need to see. It's sort of a slow way of getting them. They're all up in the pd.education site as well, though. And when you go to the site, you can search for Lit Review and they'll come up that way. Okay, so we've talked about where you are, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to get to what Timothy said about analyzing data, and then it's difficult to put it down. So before we get started, routine does make all the difference. I hear you when you say that you've got a million things on and it's hard to get to it. I have that same problem myself. But when I absolutely, and I can actually measure my commitment. Like right now, I'm finishing up a book. I'm having trouble getting to it. And I can see I'm not as committed to it as I was when I was writing the book. Because when I wrote the book, I got up every day at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock and I got it done. Now that it's the finishing up, which I just don't love this part of it, I'm having trouble getting to it. So that's a challenge. You look at whether or not you can make yourself find that time as actually an indication of commitment, and then you can decide how you might want to work with those two things together, both time and commitment. It really works to do some work every day. It does not work consistently. The people who have trouble finishing are people who try to get it all done in big chunks. Analysis of results can be a trap. And the trap is that you need to be constantly refining your argument as you go. So you're getting your data's on there and, oh, it's looking like this really interesting thing. And you play it out to your mind over here. And it's this idea you have in your head. If you are not simultaneously asking, what does this do to my argument? You are setting yourself up to have trouble to write. So argument and analysis, really the two need to be constantly worked on in your head. Otherwise, what we're talking about today can be just painful. Remember, figuring out what you say is only, and that's supposed to be half of the problem. Knowing how you're going to say it and is the other half of getting it done. So that's the writing part. Figuring it out is a quarter, I think. There was supposed to be a slash there. A quarter of the problem, 3/4 of the problem is how it's going to be said. So keep analyzing, reanalyzing the work of others as well. And that's what we're going to do today. All right. So we're going to go through several. It's a quarter after. I'm going to spend a half an hour. We'll go through as many as we can. I have others in the slides, and the slides are in the handouts. And how did I come by this sample? I just went to PD Education. Literally, this is a convenient sample. I went to this site, which is ProQuest Dissertation and Thesis, PQDT Open. And I just typed in 2019, 2020, and I took the first ones that came up. Very much a convenient sample. So I don't have a good cross-section of everybody we serve, but I do have an interesting set from that cross-sample. So this is a impact study of cross-industry healthcare partnership on economic and quality outcomes, a focus on specific types of patients pre and post implementation. And from their abstract, I pulled out key points that lead us to understand their argument. This study takes an in-depth look into one health system's business partnership with industry. Through the application of blue ocean approach, this research provided an example of how health systems can successfully combat the threat of vertical integrators through partnering. And a blue ocean strategy is a simultaneous pursuit of differentiation and low cost to open up a new market space and create a new demand. And that's the link. So, how do we analyze results chapters? We look at the way they put their data together. What do we know about this study? That there's going to be a lot of data that are medically determined, that they're interested, we know from the blue ocean strategy that they're interested in differentiation and low cost opening up a new market. We know that it's a business, it's a doctor of health administration. So we know that it's a business-oriented research. So when we look at their results section, there's an overview of the results, how they got it, what their data were. Short descriptive statistics, a short statistical analysis. All of that together only takes 5 pages. Then they broke out financial into 3 variables: length of stay, ICU transfers, and pacemaker implementation. So those are the things that bring the cost. And again, this is not very long. The whole thing is only 14 pages. Then they looked into quality of care, because it's financial and quality of care. And they measured quality of care across all-cause inpatient remissions, 30-day ER visits, 30-day post-ER visits, discharge status, severity of the illness, and they made a summary. Now, what do we know about results? We want them to be clear, as concise as possible, and just matter of fact. And we can tell from this table of contents that this is a very matter of fact. I mean, there is not a lot of room there for anything more than kind of short and sweet. Here were the results. Here's the documentation of those results. And it's descriptive and statistical, so those can be done in a shorter period of time than if it's qualitative. Now let's look at something completely different. African Americans described experience seeking church after a family member's violent death. And we can tell from the abstract that the argument is that about the significance of this work to other individuals. So these results can be utilized by mental health care counselors, educators, and supervisors in serving a diverse population in their mental health seeking behaviors. The themes uncovered as a result of the thematic analysis were church's guidance through religion, spirituality is in grief, for comfort and coping. Church is a resource for trust and relationships with God and the pastor for wisdom and direction and support, and seeking the church through cultural and familial traditions. The counseling professionals increasingly embrace multicultural competency therapy. The importance of religion and spirituality must be recognized by counseling professionals in integrating their work with this specific population and minimizing the mental help seeking behavior disparities of African American adults. So how is that put together? We know it's qualitative, and we know from the argument that we are going to see these themes. That church is a resource, relationships with God, seeking church through cultural, familial traditions. So she had a lot of data. She did a lot of interviews, and she had a lot of data. She coalesced those data into these themes. And then how does she spit those themes out? By looking at first introducing the study and the researchers. So she, in qualitative work, many people, myself included, feel that it's very important that you reflex. You do not just reflection on what you've learned, but you do reflection with an X, meaning you look into how you crafted the study and the outcomes just because of your impact as a human being. So that's taken care of in the study and the researcher. Then she did a description of the sample, which was convenience, and how she protected the participants, what the population overall is. So we have sample and population. We can see from that, she felt that was important, that she put that in this chapter. Those could also have been put in the methodology chapter. But if you put them here, what does it do for the reader? It gives us the funnel at the top. This is me, and this is how it's done. This is the sample that I went to. I actually probably would have thought, here's the population first and then the sample, because you're funneling it in. And then the results of that sample, and then what did they say? So the first 9 pages are a setup for the reader to understand what they're going to read and how the data were worked with. And then the last 20 pages essentially are a presentation of the results. So she did a thematic analysis, and she talked about how she did that thematic analysis, and then she talks about the themes and gives us qualitative quotes, tells us how those themes developed. The only thing I don't see in here is a discussion of disparate data. So did everybody agree with these themes, or did she have some things that were said that didn't fit the themes? that could have been put in the research methodology section, although it might have been a subtopic if it was. But that's the only thing that I see missing from this particular setup. Again, something very different. Metabolic consequences of an aging microenvironment in melanoma. So here we have a study that is medical. And medical studies have lots of data and lots of language that are not easy to be read from people who aren't in that particular medical environment. The point here, the argument is that aged melanoma patients over 55 years old have a worse prognosis and reduced response rates to targeted therapies relative to young patients, meaning 40 or less. So here, these data were used to report altered metabolic landscape in aged tumor microenvironments as critical for melanoma aggressiveness. So that's the argument. Now let's see. So first off, this is the kind of study, and we see it much in the STEMs, where many different complete studies were done, and then they end up kind of piggyback on each other, making a point. So there were 3 studies in this work, and the first study changes in fibroblasts in the age-dependent melanoma cell resistance therapies, and there's a results section. And the results section goes through the points that need to be made. And then the next one is about secretion of a particular enzyme by aged fibroblasts, and there's a results section, not so in depth as the one above, and then the same thing for chapter 5. So people who are listening to this may be in the sciences, and if you are, chances are you're going to follow this pattern more than the big long results chapter pattern, because your study will have been developed over time, and then you're following basically the same pattern as every journal article, and your results section is written in with the rest. Education, a comparison of demographic profiles and academic outcomes of charter schools and traditional public schools in a couple of particular counties in California. What's the argument? I think if nothing else is coming out of this, I hope you see that with the argument we can begin to guess pretty strategically what kind of data we're going to be seeing and how we think it might be organized. And then we check, is there a correspondence between that and the data as it is organized? So this study compared charter schools and traditional public schools in a couple of counties to determine whether there was meaningful differences in demographics and academic outcomes between the 2 types of public schools. A statistical method was used, and then it goes on more about the statistical methods, was used to determine if any difference between the 2 types of public schools were meaningful or practically significant. Student demographics were identified by race, ethnicity, English language acquisition status, and socioeconomic status. Academics were measured by the percent of students who met or exceeded the standard language arts. And this is the one. Actually, there was another section I thought I copied. The outcome, the argument of this is that the charter schools are less diverse socioeconomically, but they have the same overall academic challenges. So here's our results and outcomes, and maybe we'll see them here. This again is done in sections. This time though, she or he is dividing it in sections because of the topic area. And I think many of your topics will choose this sort of summary. First, we talk about the problem a little bit. We go into in this case, the data was demographic profiles of charter schools, and then looked at a research question about how they compared racially and through ethnicity, how they compared as English language acquisition, and how they compared with free and reduced lunch. So pretty quick overviews of what the data resulted in those ways. Then a summary of demographic comparisons, which led us on to section 2, academic outcomes, 2 more research questions, part 1 and part 2 of a research question about academics, 1 in English language acquisition and 1 in math, a summary. And then section 3, demographic profiles of the charter schools, back to race, ethnicity, English language acquisition, free and reduced lunch, as another outcome. And why is section 3 and section 1 different? Because 1 is different types of charter schools and 1 is charter versus traditional public schools. Again, a summary, and then again going on to that different types of charter schools, the same question. So essentially, there was a lot of variables in this study, and this person had a lot of data and was trying to figure out, how do I make this data make sense? Well, I'll make it make sense in two big pots: charters versus traditional public, and charters versus different types of charters. And then I'll make it subpots that have to do with race, ethnicity, English language acquisition, free and reduced lunch. And I'll put those in both pots, as I'll put in the outcomes for tests on English language acquisition and maths. It's all about organization. You have a lot of stuff on your plate. How do you give it to your reader so your reader can go through it? And what I liked about this one was these summaries. So when it gets too dense, some of you are dealing with data that is very dense, that is, it's head-raking dense. At the same time, you want to be taken seriously and you want people to understand how you review those data. So to put it together this way and then to give them summaries in between is a good idea for some of you, because that summary, if they're a little lost, they'll go to the summary and back and forth. And when it comes time for your defense or viva, they'll refresh their memory by going through the summaries again. So it's a strategic move, that particular layout. Okay, so now we move on to climate change of particular fungus. So there's 3 studies here. First, there's a study about fungal communities structured by climate along a particular set of mountains range in southern Arizona. And then there's a study which looks at regional scale, examining the importance of climate relevant disturbances, wildflowers specifically, on particular ectomycorrhizal communities, more funguses. And then finally, this person went back to Elizabeth, so she went back to expanding the focus to a range of ponderosa pine in Arizona, and how the distribution and diversity of the ectomycorrhizal and endophilic fungi related to the forests and spanning, and as they were isolated. So it's 3 related. They're related by fungus, but they are really taking very different perspectives. So 3 pots, what would you expect? I think just listening to this, or just looking at that, I might expect something closer to the study where we had, it could have been organized like this one. Or, I mean, no, actually more like this one, where different chapters, different sets of results. But that isn't exactly what she did. She did. There were, she put the research, those, what would have been the chapters in the last one, this author put in appendices. So the document itself was, her argument was that this was a particular, that by studying these fungus, she was expanding something in the entire field. So, and here I'm getting into a subtlety that's hard to, that may resonate for some of you. If your work is trying to get to a significance in the field, at what point do you downplay your personal experiments and upplay the results of those experiments, because that's what the field is going to take notice of? That's the strategic decision that this author made. So looking at the table of contents, the introduction included those subheadings, the importance of the fungi that were being selectively looked at, the context dependency, the understanding the communities, current knowledge, future questions, current knowledge and future questions of the different types of fungus that are being discussed, and the ponderosa pine in Arizona as a model for study system. So she has actually done a small study, thought she really knew what was going on, built a model, did another study, and then is discussing that. Much bigger contributions to the dissertation in this author's mind. Whatever your contributions are, the level of those contributions ends up being important to how much you do, what you put in your results. So what she did was discuss, this is literally a sentence, present study, research presented here is provided in 3 appendices. So that's where you get the meat of the different, and then she goes into what the outcomes were. 2.1 outcome of this. So the results chapter is focused on the outcomes of the data, outcomes of the results, rather than how she got to the results, because she's guiding us in that funnel of writing from the broadest to where you want us to go. She wants us to really think of her study as significant to the entire field. Very different way of writing up results. All right, that was a lot of difference. So what do we take from those? I purposely did not get into the how one of them told us about their statistical analysis and how another one told us about their thematic development. Because I realize that when you're in the throes of what you're doing right now, you're thinking, I have these results and I just did these things to get to these results. And it is very tempting and very usual to spend a lot of time writing how you physically did what you did that got to those results. And in some senses and in some places, that's important because you're backing up the reliability of your work. But these authors, by and large, didn't spend a lot of time doing that. They got to the point of the results because they're clear that only thing that counts in the results section is how it backs up it, how it becomes the evidence for your claim. So you're not you're not being like a student, recording what you did so your teacher can see your pattern, as much as you are an expert discussing results as they relate to the claim that your document is making. I'm apologies if this is going kind of like this in your head, because this is a conversation that includes the subtleties of why some of these documents just sing and others are ponderous to work through. Ponderous is when the distance between the doing and the writing is unclear and the writer has to take us through it all. And a document that sings is one that we can see the argument as it flows. So, checklist. Do you know your argument? Have you drafted your abstract? Can you funnel from the research questions into your data? How is that going to work? Do you know your significance? Who will care? Why? How does this work contribute? And then make sure the data or the way you give it to us is in line with that level of significance. If you're making the case that your work is significant to your entire field, then you need to position it mostly as outcomes, because the field, that's what the field cares about. And then they can go look somewhere else, like that one did, at the actual work and how it got done. If your work is significant to your local environment, then the local environment's probably going to care about all the little specifics, because that's the humanity of what we do. So you have those things in your head. Maybe you've drawn them out. Maybe you have argument in one patch and your analysis in another, and your significance over here, and you've drawn arrows and you figure out how it's going to go together. And then you use models. So you choose a model of results that fits the way you are thinking. And I've given you out some that you could use. What is a model? It is just the headings and how you're putting it together for your reader. And then you double and triple check if your results are of a strength that will substantively convince your reader, and that you've done an adequate job of investigating disconfirming evidence. I think more and more you're going to be held to that standard. So what did you see that doesn't fit this that you're talking about? And what are you doing with that? And you can do something with it in the limitations. You can do something with it in the conversation recommendations. But you have to really have a handle on what you got that didn't go along with the massive amount of stuff that leads to your conclusions. So I have to say thank you to Adrian for being our student example today. She sent in her current writing, and a little bit of background here. I've watched this work develop over 3 years now, at least. And I must say, I'm really impressed. So I thought for this exercise, we'd go backwards to see if that was useful to you. Okay, so this is her results section. This is a linguistic study looking at the data were an analysis of textbooks written for English language learners, looking at some very specific discourse meanings, observations about the textbooks, simple present, present progressive, different ways of looking at the language to see what could be determined. Well, you'll see. You'll hopefully we'll build a picture of what she's saying by starting with the results and then going backwards out. So this is a different way in, looking just at the results section. What do we see? Well, that it's a discourse, looking at units of analysis. The context is different units of analysis. That she proceeded with intercoder reliability. So the way she coded things were looked at by somebody else. That there were distributional characteristics that went into the analysis. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. Then the discussion of the results takes on point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. Kind of generally, the simple present, form, semantics, discourse, meaning. You'll see that these fall, the present progressive, form, semantics, discourse, meaning, overarching observations within textbooks and across textbooks. So those sections help the reader cement themselves. And we now know what went on. We know how it went on. We feel like we have an understanding of it in general. And then she goes through the need for input robustness, input variability, determination of variability levels. This is getting more and more specific. And that's a good funnel. General, comfortable in the middle, and then funneling into the things that are very specific and smaller and smaller, clear down to the empirical indicators of robust input or not. So even though this is not my field, and I've always struggled with her work, because the language and the ideas you'd have to work with a lot to be comfortable with. I can see just by looking at this that the funnel of it is sharp, and that the reader will be able, look at all the subheadings, that she is stepping step by step the reader where she wants them to go. When the more complex your work is, the more likely that is very necessary. And there's some discussion I'm seeing I missed, but we'll. So let's look at this. What are research questions? And then we can go back. What are the distributional characteristics of the English simple present and present progressive in ESL textbooks? So they're broken out in the 4.3.1 and 4.3.2. What are the input variability and input frequency of these, respectively? We go back and we see that that's the 4.3.4s and 4.4.3, input frequencies 4.5s. So she is following her research questions. What is the input robustness of the simple present and present progressive, respectively? And what qualifies as robust input at the empirical level? And that's the last one. Okay, so what does all this work mean? What good is it? And what is the actual argument here? And I chose two things from her writing. I was looking at then just how is this written, and the 4.3.3 overarching observations, and then again, because I'm looking as I go through these for disconfirming evidence, I jumped to the bottom of that section and pulled out another bit. The distributional characteristic of the simple present and present progressive in terms of form, semantics, and discourse meaning have been presented in this previous sections respectively. While some local observations, those specific to the notion, have been highlighted in the aforementioned section, there are noteworthy global observations common to both constructions. In what follows, such overarching observations are organized into a within textbook and across textbook observation. Those observations are made, so we understand there was organization there. And then one important caveat must be noted. Despite the above within textbook observations thus far, the input distribution presented was calculated using the aggregate frequencies of the simple present and present progressive as denominators, respectively. What this means is that the number of relevant discourse contexts was not used as a unit of analysis. Consequently, there is no way of telling whether phenomenon such as one form encoding multiple meanings in fact occurred in multiple discourse contexts or in a single discourse context on the sole basis of what is presented in tables 4.3.1 and 4.3.2. For this reason, measuring input distribution in the manner described up till this point apparently fails to account for the actual spread of the two constructions per relevant discourse contents. Such projections of input distribution have limited insights to offer beyond type and token frequencies. I appreciate that paragraph for a number of reasons, but the clarity, the short sentences, the ability that it's just very clear writing that points to, by the way, you can't take all of this in this way. You have to realize that there are some limitations here, some other things. It's what I call an in-depth academic, sophisticated conversation. Now, not everyone's final dissertation gets to this level, but there are examples in all of our fields of people who do write to this level of density and clarity, and this is a very good example. So I asked her to send back her argument, and she sent me her abstract from which she pulled a couple of things. I added a little bit at the top. So what is this all about? Globalization trends in the 21st century have resulted in a vibrant English language learning sector. By 2023, levels of prospective learners are expected to hit 1.4 billion worldwide. More than ever, the ability to master English as a second language has become key to advancing educational opportunities, careers, prospects, and intercultural exchange. Without venturing into how discourse contexts afford what types of form, meaning, use mapping can occur, and at what frequencies, the field's understanding of how input distribution impacts in learning English as a second language learning outcomes remains incomplete. Ultimately, this information reveals the learnability of learning English as a second language form's most primary meanings. So, her work, let's go backwards. It's significant to the field. In fact, it's significant to the world. She's done it in a way that the results have set her up in a way that is clear and also presents the intricacies and sophistication of her design. So, and is easily in tandem with her research questions, so that the way she organized her results takes us through everything step by step. When you're claiming this big a significance, that step by step with clarity and yet sophistication is very, very important. So I want to say thank you. We are seeing work before it's done, and it may change again, but it's done a really beautiful job of showing us the way these things go back and forth. Now, Adrian, if it's all right with you, that we have just a few minutes. I'm going to fly through the rest of my slides, and then I'm going to turn on. Would you mind just telling people a little bit about your strategy? I will make you presenter. I just want to flash everybody through the rest of the slides. There are resources. There is a PhD Scholars that has more about this, how you analyze from argument to your results chapter. There are other resources on the site, which I've given you in the slides. Your homework is to self-diagnose. Start with your models, diagnose one or more of them the way we did today. do the same for what you've got in mind and critically analyze what you're doing according to the checklist. And real quickly, I'm just saying the next one we do is on outlining the 3 chapters. Oh, actually, I didn't put up. The next one we do is more about writing. It's the discussion session. That's what comes up next. And please take that survey. Adrian, how was this to do? Was this really hard to get to that level of clarity?
Oh, it took me quite some time to figure out everything and put things together in a logical manner.
And were there breakthroughs when you understood one thing would work really well? Would you pass on hints to other people?
I think the one thing that I need to be crystal clear about throughout the whole process is what argument I'm advancing. I think it's like the chapters are like the different. If it's like an anatomy of a human body, the different chapters are like the different organs, but then there must be some kind of skeleton or a backbone to hold up everything together, and that I think that skeleton or the backbone is principally your argumentation.
It is. I agree. If and to the extent you can hang it on your art, you can hang everything to your argumentation. You have a much easier time of building things consistently. But this really, your work is complex and it's sophisticated, and yet it could be analyzed step by step this way. So you did a very good job of that. Was there any time once you began, when you were analyzing, did you know your argument from the beginning? Was it that clear, or did you have to take some side roads in your analysis before it became clear?
I think it's like, I would say it's like solving criminal case, like it's like a criminal investigation. Sometimes the facts and the evidence, the pieces of evidence have always been right before me, but I'm just not blind to them because of whatever things that's going on in my head, and I don't see them as for what they truly are. And I think that's what sometimes hinders the progress.
And did the inter-rater reliability help with that, or did you have another set of eyes that helped you break through some of your own fog, or how did you get past that?
I think the biggest breakthrough is when I decided to get some help with the statistical modeling, which is the core of the study, and which has been a piece that before I had any statistical consultation, I found that piece hard to fit into the whole study in a seamless manner. But then once I got that statistical model worked out, I found that everything seemed to fall into place much more appropriately, and I think that's when the major breakthroughs happened.
Excellent. So I'm hearing keep at it. It's not easy. Look for the underpinning foundational ideas. They might help sort things out, whether it's statistics or it's thematics or however it is, and make sure it all pins back on the argument. Would you say those are the 3 big takeaways?
Yes, and yes, I think sometimes I also try to do too many things with one study, but then I always remind myself of my advisor's advice, which is you can do whatever and however much work that you want to do after you get the degree. But for this project, you just stick with your research questions and get it done.
Yes, and it's not uncommon, and maybe this will be useful for people in the room. that studies sometimes get honed down. If you might not be able to make a good argument at the broad scale of all the data you have, but you can craft out of that a smaller piece that makes a very significant argument. And then the rest can be work that you do after you graduate, and you can publish many things from the data that you get sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
So whenever I get lost, I will go back to her advice and look. I actually have those 4 research questions pinned onto my desk wall, and then so that I don't easily get lost when I'm like I feel overwhelmed with analyzing the data or writing up the narratives and so on.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it's beautiful. Are you done? Are you close to done? Where are you in this? Are you working on discussion now?
Yes, I'm between wrapping up the final section of chapter 4 and getting started with the chapter 5, but because of the analysis that I've done for chapter 4, I pretty much have most of the ideas for chapter 5 with me already.
Yes.
I think it's important to keep note of what you have found in chapter 4 as you move along, so that you don't forget what you found and the significance of what you found when you write chapter 5, because they go hand in hand together.
Yes, they do. And we can see that in the one that I did, where she put all of her actual studies in appendices and just focused the reader on the outcomes of what those were. So different people do that differently, but you keep focusing your reader on that argument. So I bet your discussion session will go well, and I hope that next week has a few nubs that will be helpful to you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
I'm
appreciate that.
just so pleased with the work. It was exciting to go through your work today. So thank you, everybody. And with that, I'm going to close off the recording. I have to run off to another meeting, actually. But we're just out of time. I think everybody, if we were all in a room, wouldn't we all be clapping for Adrienne and her work? It's really good to see something that comes together after hard work. And she had a few mountains to climb as it all went on. And stop the recording.